Hello, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. Welcome to special edition of Wisdom Seeker Live. I appreciate everyone that joins today. Hope that this will be a time of gaining some wisdom and hopefully also gain some encouragement. And so I hope that you'll join. Hope that you'll comment, especially let us know where you're joining from, and please be sure to type in any comments, questions in the comments area so that we can hear from you and engage as well. I apologize. I am dealing with some technical things right now. So, and a couple of administrative things. I just like to remind people that as we go through the podcast that I will be looking around, and it's not that I am distracted. I promise it's because I'm watching 3 different screens to help make this happen. One day I maybe will be able to have someone that can help moderate and keep me looking straight ahead at the camera. Welcome, David from Washington. I appreciate you being up bright and early West Coast and joining. Thank you. I appreciate you being here. And just as a, like I always do when we start the podcast, good morning, Zaid. Good to see you. It's been a while. I like to just reiterate the setting for what we talk about wisdom. Make sure we are on a common ground there, common understanding. Welcome, Diana. Good to see you from Ireland. Always good to hear from you. So wisdom, for the sake of this podcast, is a 3-part journey. And it is a journey that starts with gaining knowledge, which is very helpful. Fortunately, we live in a time where gaining knowledge has become very easy and readily attained. But knowledge is facts, figures, and the like, and just information that we can use. Welcome, Mamit and Keith. Glad to have you. Wow, from the UK, from India. Quite an international audience this morning. So anyway, the first step in a wisdom journey, seeking out wisdom, starts with gaining knowledge. And hopefully, if we have the right mindset, that's not such an effort. It's something that we do naturally because we're curious and interested. Then the next step in the process of gaining wisdom is to gain understanding, and that comes from experiences. You know, what happens to us on a day-to-day basis. And so we take the knowledge that we've gained and hopefully begin to apply it to our day-to-day experiences and use them to help us along the way and solve problems and so on. And then the third step, welcome Vaisant and Anna. Glad to have you. Cyprus. Wow, Anna, you're a first-time guest from Cyprus, so thank you. And so the last step in this process of seeking and gaining wisdom is the more challenging part, and it takes an extra step of effort, and that is to gain perspective that's bigger and outside of ourselves, so that we contextualize our knowledge and our understanding, and we begin to take and apply that knowledge and understanding and have it in light of more than just our own self-interest, and more than just what happens to me right that moment. So it's a much bigger perspective. And for those of us that are spiritually minded, the way that I like to express it is that we, at that point, are seeking to see things through God's eyes, our Creator's eyes. Because when we can begin to see things in that way, it helps us to be able to get a better understanding of ourselves. And it also helps us to be able to begin to look at applying our knowledge and understanding in areas that are beneficial, not just to ourselves, but to others. So for the Wisdom Seeker Live podcast, that's where we go for and what we mean by seeking and gaining wisdom. So normally I don't do the Sunday morning time frame. Our normal time for Wisdom Seeker Live is Monday mornings at 8 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And so I appreciate those of you joining. But this week I just really felt on my heart and in my mind that I continue to watch people live in fear, and that we see that fear growing. And what I want us to do is to look at the whole idea of fear, and then look at a balancing characteristic, and that's courage. And thought that might be helpful today as we deal with the things going on around us and struggle. And so for those of you that have watched the podcast previously, know that I like to, I guess it's the teacher in me, but I like to share visuals and information, because people learn from seeing as well as hearing. Good morning, Matt Crump. Thank you. I appreciate you being here. Matt is taking a time out from his busy schedule as he, I know, will be preparing to lead church in his area. So thank you. I appreciate you stopping by. So speaking of knowledge, let's look at what is fear. And according to Merriam-Webster, which has been around the Merriam-Webster dictionary, been around a long time, says that it's an unpleasant, often strong emotion caused by anticipation or awareness of danger. An instance of this emotion, a state marked by this emotion. And so fear is generally something anticipated rather than something actual. So that's important to remember, that fear is based generally on something that hasn't happened that might happen, and it evokes an emotion. And I also like to look at visuals, and it's always fascinating, and you can do this as well. What I do is I just go out and Google the word fear and get the definition, and then I Google the word fear and look at images. And these images, I'm sure we can all identify with at some point, because it captures the essence of how we have felt, or what we go through when we deal with fear. And so, again, just trying to get a common ground for what we're talking about. And so that's about fear. And then let's look at courage. Okay, and according to the dictionary, courage is the ability to do something that frightens one, strength in the face of pain or grief. So that's a definition of courage. Let's look at the visuals that go with it. A lot of them are about quotes, and I always like the fact that lions are an example of courage. And so again, we began to see images related to courage. I like this one because you see the kitty picturing itself as a lion, and so courage is about making some choices and making decisions for ourselves. And one thing that I always like to make it clear about courage. Some people want to say courage is synonymous with fearless, and I would suggest that it is not. In fact, the concept of fearless is something that I would suggest it should be approached with caution, because fear is not an altogether bad thing. It helps us when we need it to avoid dangerous situations or harmful situations. So fear is not a bad thing. It is part of our design. So when I talk courage, I don't have room in there for fearless in my estimation. So just a couple of images there that are related to courage. So it helps us to have a common basis to work from. And then let's see, Zaid shared a comment. Courage is so much in many places because of the fear of offending this or that, is missing in many places. Okay, Zaid corrected himself. And yes, courage is lacking. In fact, today, one of the things that I think of that we especially are lacking and in need of is moral courage. And we'll get into that in a moment. So the whole concept of fear, and one of the aspects of fear that bothers me is that fear is fed by information, and we build fear up in our own minds, and we are unfortunately really good at it. I know I am. When something comes up, or when I start dreading something or worry that it will happen, then I begin to build this up in my mind. And the more that I feed it knowledge that is negative, then the greater the fear. One of the sayings that I've developed is, because I know a lot of people talk about overcoming our fears by being dragon slayers, if you will. And I certainly appreciate that visual and that description, because it works. But what I find for myself and in talking with many others, that what we often think are dragons that we need to slay are really what a much smaller animal, and that's a lizard, which most of us see a lizard. It's very small and unthreatening. And so we quite often take a lizard and it's something small and unthreatening and build it up in our minds to a point that it appears like a dragon. And it causes us to even get to a point where we are completely frozen, hard pressed to make decisions and take actions because of that fear. And extreme cases is, for example, some of the phobias and like fear of height, fear of closed spaces. And so I don't mean to demean those that struggle with those kinds of fears, but what I do hope is that we can overcome them by starting to deal with them and get them in context. Let's see here. David shared something. He says that he suffered from imposter syndrome in October of 2020 and then wrote a book titled The Fear of Confidence. Okay, good one, David. Imposter syndrome is definitely another form of fear that many of us will deal with at different times, and it's something to overcome. One of the things that I like to think through with fear, like to be practical in offering wisdom related to this, but one of the first things quite often that helps us to overcome fear is just literally talking about it out loud, even if we just talk about it out loud with ourselves. And I know some people might say that's strange behavior, but if you want to deal with fears, especially fears that are keeping you from moving forward, then we have to resort to maybe what some might consider strange behaviors. I would be cautious talking to yourself out in public. People might get a wrong impression. The other aspect to that is to have a mentor, a friend, a confidant that you can express it and just say, look, I'm afraid of this, whatever this is, and get it out. And I find that quite often just voicing our fear can go a long way towards giving it perspective. Welcome, Todd. Glad to have you with us. Thanks for joining. And so fear, if we voice our fear out, it can give it perspective. Good morning or good day, Sarika. I have to forget that it's not morning for everyone, and I do that by habit. My apologies. So just voicing out our fear, hearing it out loud in our own voice, and then if someone voices it back, all of a sudden that very act can bring perspective. When we hear it, run it around in our own head, sometimes it just takes on proportions that really aren't accurate. And as a result, will cause it to grow and build and become very scary. And so just that simple act of voicing it out quite often. And Zaid makes a comment, and this is going to really my next comment. We need to acknowledge the source of the fear and see what's the root cause of it and address the cause. And you're right, Zaid, and one of the ways that we can begin to do that is if it's something that we have experienced before and then been able to act out of courage and overcome it, then sometimes we have to just remind ourselves of that we have been there, done that, and we can do that again. The other way to be able to look at the root cause, glad you're enjoying it, Diana, appreciate that, is to begin to really just break down the fear. And one of my favorite ways to break it down and get to the source of it and dig around is to say, okay, I'm afraid that X will happen if I do X, whatever that is. And what I do then is go, okay, well, if the worst thing happens, then so what? Welcome, Nuvera. Good to see you again. So if this worst thing happens, then so what? Is that truly all that bad? Is it Is it going to be life-threatening? Is it going to destroy other aspects? And just start breaking it down in that fashion. If the very worst fear that we have happens, then what's the result? And can I deal with it in that manner? And so that helps to bring it into context, bring it into perspective. And remember, we talked about earlier that fear is in concern or anxiety related to what might happen. It is not what has happened, it's what might happen. And as we begin to address the fear of what might happen, and we start considering it in that context and dig around, that is something that will help us to find what is at the root of it. Let's see here. Todd shares a comment. He's addressing it. Zaid, fear's an illusion. Most of the time we don't own the source. It was something our mind attached to. That's good insight. Todd, thank you. Yes. Quite often fears are unfounded and are maybe even irrational. And Navara asked a question. And Navara, I apologize, on the stream, you're showing up as LinkedIn user. Don't know why that happens sometimes. And your question is this the same as being vulnerable? Well, certainly vulnerability is a fear for many people. The fear that someone might see us, and I think the fear is more about not if they see us, but if they see us, then we might not be liked or be looked down on, whatever. So yes, being vulnerable is a fear, no doubt. And so something to keep it in perspective. And let's see here. Todd shares another comment. The amygdala can be controlled. Only think positive thoughts and accept them as truth. We're all born with universal potential. We can overcome anything. We just need to identify with it and attach to it. Yes, indeed, the battle of fear is in our minds, and we'll talk a bit about how that comes into play with conversation in regards to courage. So thank you for that. But so fears can get to a point that they will cause us to move into inaction, and even to a point of mental and emotional stresses that are just remarkable. So we have an understanding of fear on at least a high level, and that we need to remember that it is something that hasn't happened, and that it is affected the way we think and the way we feel, and it can do so to a point that we just aren't able to move forward, and there's even health implications to it, and so on. So with that in mind, then let's talk about courage. And courage is not, as I mentioned earlier, an absence of fear. It's not being fearless. What courage is a mindset, a decision based on other information, and it is based in character, which character is developed through struggle, through challenges, and also by learning from other people of character. And it's that character called on to help overcome whatever it is that we are fearing or afraid of. And that's what courage is about. It doesn't mean we're no longer afraid. What it means is that even with fear, that we can overcome it, because it is best not to allow the fear to affect our choices. And again, I want to remind you, part of fear is there to protect us. I believe that we are designed with a fear factor in us because our Creator knew that we needed to be aware when there is danger, and in order to protect ourselves, but it's never intended to be the foundation for how we behave and how we respond. It is there to protect us. So, and I apologize. I saw a comment earlier and I didn't highlight it. I thought it was comment between two of y'all, but it appears that it might be worth sharing. So Mom Manmeet shared that with Anna about his father being the Indian Navy during one of his operations as a fleet commander, and helped 1,700 civilians evacuate from Lebanon as 4 Indian ships sortied from Lebanon to Cyprus back in 2006. Sounds like an example of courage on the part of your father, and to the benefit of the people of Cyprus, where Anna's from. So thank you for sharing that, Manmeet. Let's see. Sam has a comment to share. Says, I think that fear is a byproduct of feeling that you have no control. I've discovered that once you realize the ultimate control comes from a spiritual source, call it what you may, you find comfort. It then ties, for me anyway, to good, ultimately overcoming evil. We're mere vessels, and upon this earth for movement, we're spiritual being at the end of the day. And Sam, you're so right. And part of the source of courage has to have a spiritual component to truly help us overcome. In fact, one of the things, and I know that, again, I normally don't delve into spiritual things as much, but being a special edition, I'm going to do so more. It's really quite interesting. And those of you that have followed this podcast know that I believe that the Bible is a great source of wisdom, whether you agree with the spiritual tenets or not. Happen to personally agree and believe with them. But anyway, one of the things that is in the Bible is scripture verses that talk about anxiety, which is another type of fear. And it's there are at least 365 times that in the Bible it says, "Do not be anxious," or "Do not fear." And interestingly enough, just as a matter of connection, that's one comment about not fearing or not having anxiety for each day of the year, because we were never intended to live in fear. That's our Creator never intended for us to live in that fashion. Fear that is healthy is occasional. It is something that is there for instances, it's not a way of living. In fact, in the Bible, it tells us that one of the cures, if you will, or antidotes to fear is God's love. And it says in the Bible that God's perfect love casts out fear. Part of a source or a reason that fear will take hold, and I appreciate that Sam alluded to this earlier about the spirit, is that for me, one of the things that helps me overcome fear, especially fear on a large scale, is I believe that God loves me and that He is love. And as a result of that love, He is always going to do what is best for me. And be careful to note, it's not necessarily what I want, but what is best. But I know in His love as the motivation that He is always going to cause things. And this is another passage of scripture. It's Romans 8:28 says that all things will work together for the good that who love God and are called according to His purpose. So one of the antidotes to fear is trusting God's character. And a lot of us don't even acknowledge God. Others of us question God's character. And as a result, it will feed fear in us because we think that there is no control, and especially we don't have it. And let's see here. Todd makes a comment to Sam. Well said. In my humble opinion, emotions are different than feelings. Emotions create feelings in oneself. So we're getting into some real deep consideration, which is great. By the way, it is a massive way to overcome fear and to gain wisdom is self-awareness and diving deep into understanding ourselves. Another comment from Zaid: to the person suffering from fear, it's a real thing. It shows itself by many symptoms. That's why those who suffer from it need help. Denying it won't help. Addressing the source and dealing with it in reality of it help people see that what they're mostly suffering from is just in their mind. And yes, one thing that we need to be careful is not to deny fear. In fact, that to me, when people say, well, I'm fearless, to me, they are denying fear and they are short-circuiting our very design. And so we need to be careful with denying fear. And Matt shares a comment: fear can expose darkness and be a light to courage, which breeds confidence and clarity. Yeah, fear is not, like I said, it's not a bad thing or something that we seek not to have. It is an opportunity as part of our design to be able to grow and learn and gain wisdom as we are attentive to it. And so just, again, don't feel like that I am espousing being fearless. That is not at all the case. And let's see. Wow, good comments here. Todd says, we have no control. We can only be accountable for what we do not do, say, and do not say while on the face of this earth. Interesting comment, Todd, and I agree with you that we have very little control over anything, with one exception, and this is part of the discussion on dealing with fear, and that is our attitude or how we respond to things. That is where we have ultimate control, and we'll talk a little bit as time permits about how to be effective in that. But you're right, we have very little control, and we're responsible for what we do, say, and how the choices we make. Let's see, Todd also shared says a grounding Native American parable about good versus no good is, which wolf will you feed? God, the divine of all, that is only love. We are created in the divine's image, therefore we are all one. The Trinity lives within us all. Certainly a key point that part of dealing with fear is to remember that we are indeed triune. We have a body, soul, and spirit, and they all function together And in order to be healthy, including healthy enough to overcome fear, is we need to be nurturing our total being, body, soul, and spirit. So really important. Another comment from Zaid, great comment. Fear is like an alarm system, not meant to sound all the time, but to help us stay alive and away from danger when that danger could happen. And it's connect with a chemical reaction in the body, producing cortisol to prompt our muscles. Yeah, it's called the flight capability or adrenaline rush, and you're right. Thanks, Dr. Betty. Welcome. Appreciate you supporting Todd's comment. So as we think about overcoming fear, we need to get context for it. We need to understand it. And as shared before, try to look at the root cause of those fears. Some of those root causes can be traced to experiences early in our life that reside and even sometimes reside without us even having a conscious awareness of it. And so sometimes we have to dig into that. Excuse me, I apologize, a little frog in my throat. But I will tell you a common root of fear for us is a fear of going back to what we believe that our parents or our family have said about us or communicated, even if it wasn't spoken, about our value. And those fears, those wounds and concerns about them being right about our value plagues us for a long time. And it's a whole nother topic that we could delve into, maybe something to consider down the road, no doubt. But roots of fears, and some of you've also, and these are emotional, by the way, and also factor in mentally, because it's a piece of knowledge that we had planted in our minds at some point that will feed that fear. And then one of the other sources, and this is something that in our current culture is not always considered because it has just unfortunately been allowed to be dismissed, and that is our spirit. And getting fed fears in the spiritual area. And I'm getting a little deeper into spiritual matters, but we deal with two different spiritual forces in our world. And one is God's spirit, and which is based in love and based in good. And then spirit that is evil, and it has been characterized, even lampooned, and is referred to as the devil, demons, things like that. And what I do offer caution that the evil spirit in our world is very real, and it impacts us, and it will and can be the root of fears if we're not careful. And so just an awareness of the roots of these fears help us to begin to sort them out and come to terms with them. And then Manmeat adds to his earlier comment, and that is, David Alto, indeed I am. He is a true inspiration. You can download and read his book titled Blue Waters Ahoy. Nice. So maybe it might be worth checking out a book about Manmeat's dad and source of inspiration, maybe a way to help us consider overcoming fear. Nice share. Thank you for that. And Todd shares that he was speaking to external things, and I get it, Todd. I understand that your reference is to the things outside of us, and certainly agree with you. Welcome, Sharon. Glad to see you made it. I know you had previous commitments, and thanks for joining. Okay, Ephraim, welcome. Ephraim's a colleague and friend, and he says, I like the way you structured the statement as proposed to the scripture. If we fear, we're not made perfect in God's love. In all reality, we all have fear in some instances. Having faith or stepping out on faith is fearful at times, but we trust in God, and the Holy Spirit leads us and guides us to all truth, trusting in and total dependence on Him, casting out fear. Yes, one of the things, practical matters of overcoming fear, thank you, Ephraim, for that, is indeed faith. And that's why at times I talk about that we need to be reminded, and the scripture tells us that even as we grow in wisdom, we should maintain the faith of a little child. And that faith of a little child is a willingness to trust God's character and His love for us to a point that, in spite of fears, that we realize that He has got us protected and loves us and is not going to allow something to happen to us that is not ultimately for our good. And so thank you for that. That is indeed so true. And Todd shares another comment. Past programming are projections of others, primarily of our parents, which they passed on from their parents, but those thoughts were not us at the time the projection was made. The first 8 years of life, you were given others' beliefs, which were not you, and you did not own them, so release them. Interesting comment, Todd. I agree and I disagree in that it depends on the parents, because there are some parents that unfortunately even behave towards their children in a way that is self-centered and more about what the parents live and think. And in fact, in worst cases, parents, and I see this unfortunately, that a lot of parents try to relive their life through their children, or try to overcome their mistakes through their children with a flawed assumption that their children are exactly like them, and they are not. Now, without getting too deep into it, we are a byproduct of our parents, both genetically, spiritually, and in those regards, but each of us is unique and designed and created unique as an individual by God's perfect plan. And but yes, a lot of times part of what we have to overcome is the challenge of parents either unknowingly or knowingly projecting these thoughts and ideas in our heads that we have to deal with in time. And it's something I've written an article about my experience for anyone interested on. You can find it on LinkedIn. It's called The Cocky Rooster. And so indeed, it is something that we have to overcome. And one of the key things that I want us to really take away today that is so critical is that the battleground between fear and courage happens in our minds, and through what happens in our minds, we make a choice whether to believe truth or whether to accept what, for lack of a better way of saying it, lies, misinformation, and correct information that drives fears. And so one of the things that I really continue to encourage people to do is to consider what we're allowing to come into our minds. You know, for a long time, it was a big mantra that everyone should have an open mind. And I understand that there's value in not being locked into some things. But one of the best cautions that I can offer to anyone is that we guard our hearts and minds. And in the Bible, it says that we should guard our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And so there is design to help us not allow bad stuff into our minds and our hearts that affect how we think and deal with things. And so we just really need to be careful in what we expose ourselves to and what we listen to, observe, and what we tell ourselves. Personal narratives become a factor. Let's see. Sam shares a comment. I think that what prompted this meeting to begin with, based on what you've observed, Kevin, is a generalized sense of insecurity amid significant changes that are affecting humanity as a whole. I know that is the case for me. The threats have always been there, but there's no question in mind that evil is very much staying busy. In my mind, humanity, I lost my place there, Sam, is fighting for survival, and the fight or flight scenario is a thing collectively at this moment in our history. A lot of fear. Indeed, yes, I'll be just brutally honest. The fear that I'm observing is especially being driven currently around this whole pandemic and virus and all that. I'm of the opinion that the fear and response to this has been greatly taken out of proportion and built into a massive dragon. And the reality is that it's not a dragon and never has been, and that we need the courage to be able to sort through and consider for ourselves by using both information as well as using our spirit and sources of information and input that are more reliable. And I go back to the beginning of this year when I was led to start Wisdom Seeker Live. One of the other things that I was led to encourage people was to take a 40-day challenge. And I really should have just said, hey, this should become a lifelong daily challenge. And that is that if we're going to have courage and overcome fear, in addition to acknowledging God's character and recognizing that He loves us, and sometime, if we want, we can get into digging into that and more in depth. But for now, trusting in God's character. And the other part is that we have to begin to disconnect from sources of information, sources of input that are at best not accurate and at worst out and out lies, and consider how to not continuously expose ourselves to those. So disconnecting from the noise was what was the first step in this challenge. And frankly, for most of us, the noise that is causing us the greatest problem currently is the current media, news media, even social media, and all of the fear and negative thinking that is out there. And please understand, I'm not talking about being ill-informed. I'm talking about how you become informed. And so disconnecting from the noise. Some people, it may not be news media. It may be friends around us that are reinforcing negative or bad thoughts. So disconnect from the noise. Make it a conscious choice to do so. Second step in this process is to then observe. We spend too much time on autopilot, especially when it comes to our mind and our will and our emotions. And we go about our daily living because our priority, our life has become earning a living and going about things. And stop and observe what we do. Observe who we are. Observe what's going on, not just around us, but what is going on inside of us. And as we take the time to do that, then we start getting additional insight and understanding. We begin to delve into some of the roots that feed these fears and keep us from living in courage. And in the last part, we've disconnected from the noise, so we're removing inputs that are dragging us down, that are causing us to be fearful. We're observing, we're dealing with the issues that are affecting this fear, this anxiety that we're living in. And then lastly, we need to seek and gain wisdom. So in light of what we observe, what we begin to learn, we need to then seek out wisdom. Find out outside of ourselves, get God's perspective on what's going on in us and outside of us, and then begin to make choices in that regard. And just such a key thing that we need to do. And part of this gaining wisdom is learning about what God has for us and what we are about. That's part of the reason that I will be announcing next week the rollout of a course on reaching our potential. That's God's vision for my life, is to help people reach their potential, and I'm going to be doing a 7-week course on it, so be watching for that. And so definitely consider joining that if you're able. Let's see, Manmeet has made a comment. Just to add, Dr. Brian Weiss has done path-breaking work on past life regression. In his book, Many Lives, Many Masters, he has spoken about how phobias develop to incidents in previous lives can be corrected by hypnotherapy. Yeah, hypnotherapy has value in that it helps us sometimes dig a little deeper into ourselves than we might not choose to go. So yes, I appreciate that. And Sam makes a comment: for those that find spiritual connections when dealing with fear, fasting, meditation, prayer, etc., provide a means for introspection that frees up the soul and mind from fear, which many have commented are often based on things that are really smaller than they seem. Yeah, the lizard versus the dragon. Indeed, once we begin to get insights and perspectives, no doubt. And Todd's recommending a book, Thou Art That, by, oh my goodness, by Joseph Campbell. I'm not going to attempt the parentheses there. And I'll recommend a book, a couple of books while we're at it. One of those is called, it's an older book called His Image, My Image, by an author named Josh McDowell. It proved to be very insightful and pivotal for me and for us men. Ladies, hope don't take offense. I'm suggesting this one because I think men are more needy in this regard, but it's called Wild at Heart, and it goes into dealing with some of the fears and hurts that men have experienced growing up. So it's worthwhile considering. So fear and courage. Fear is something that most times is not well-founded. It is on occasion correct, as Zaid had mentioned. It's kind of like a smoke alarm or a fire alarm. It goes off when it's needed, but it shouldn't be there all the time. And that is true. There are moments, in fact, as I have grown and have nurtured in my spirit, that God's Spirit will prompt me in ways to have, the term fear seems strong, but a misgiving, an uneasiness in my heart about doing something. And as a result, I will hold off. And I believe that is a place where healthy fear comes into play, because it's based in God's character, not my mind and emotions that might mislead me. And so we've talked about fear. Courage is a choice, and the choice is to move forward in spite of fear. And the choice should be based on good insight, good information, wisdom to make those choices from. Courage is also a result of character, where we have struggled. I will share, watching our time, share an instance. For those that know me, I am a pretty accomplished craftsman with my hands. And I struggled at one point because I was asked by a friend to help him tear out some stairs in his home and rebuild them. And sounds like something, you kind of go, well, that's not a big deal. Well, for anyone that knows much about skills, building stairs, especially with lots of constraints, is a very difficult thing to do. And especially in this situation, this was at the main part of my friend's house. So if it went wrong, aside from feeling and looking stupid, it would reflect poorly on my friend. And so I struggled with it initially at first I was going to say, well, not something I can do, not something that I'm comfortable with. And to boil it down to, it ultimately was a feeling that I would, being afraid of doing it wrong. But what I ultimately did was go back and go through some of the processes that we've talked about. And I remind myself that, first of all, I have a talent or a gift to do these things. Welcome, Dr. Vishnu. Good to see you and hear from you from India. And so I reminded myself that God had given me the ability to do these things. Second thing is that I reminded myself that I had done stairs before and done them successfully and worked through it. And so basically I had to go through a process in my mind of working through and figuring out what was driving this. And again, I hope this doesn't sound almost trivial, but for me, it was a struggle. And ultimately, by looking at various inputs and talking through it and working through it, I began to realize that this was an unhealthy fear. And fast forward, I made the decision, took some courage for me to accept the project and made the decision to move ahead with it. And ultimately it turned out great. My friend was pleased. It looked good and so on. But initially I had the fear that I couldn't do it, shouldn't do it, and so on. And it's a process we work through. And what I am encouraging us today is to work through that process and simply put, disconnect from the noise, the things that tell us wrongly or give us incorrect or bad information. Second step, observe, think through, consider what has happened and what we are about, who we are, and so on. And then seek to gain wisdom in this area by seeing it from God's perspective, seeing it from a bigger perspective and outside of ourselves. And so I just encourage you all, current environment, please, okay, to use an old word, a biblical word, I implore you to not live in fear given our current cultural circumstances, our world circumstances, because we are not intended to live in fear. That's never part of our design. And we need to not be a product of fear, but of walking in courage, and really begin to make choices based on courage rather than fear. Take the time to really sort through what we're dealing with in our current world. And I believe you will find that you can overcome this fear and get to a point where you are not stuck and living with fear daily. Key to that, remember God's love and his character. And one other aspect of that, and I'm over time, but real quickly, one of our fears is if we do something, our value as a person will be threatened. Our value is given us by our Creator, okay? We didn't earn it, so we can't lose it. Others didn't give it to us, so they can't take it away. So the more we can understand our value and live in God's value of us, the sooner we can be less worried about what people think and driven by others' opinions. So I just encourage you to explore that. Well, we're up against time. Wow, what some great comments and conversation from everyone. Thank you. I apologize that I was not able to highlight everyone's comments, but you can all see them in the comments. And if you want to refer back to this, by the way, if you go to my profile and look up, see all activity and look at posts, you can go back and reference this today and pick up on it and share and continue forward. So thank you, everyone, and God bless you. And I pray that you will begin to not live in fear, but live in courage and walk and be an example, because right now in our world, we need people that are examples of courage and walking and living in it to really help us overcome. So thank you. I hope that you have an amazing week. Join tomorrow, by the way, a regular episode of Wisdom Seeker Live will be at 8 o'clock Eastern tomorrow morning. And Sam Delgado, one of the folks participating today, and I will continue conversation on wise choices around education. And so hope you'll join us. Invite others to be there with us as well. It'll be another great time. Take care. See you later.